Well, welcome everyone. As you may know, my name is Jungi Lee. I'm a legal advisor at the International Committee of the Red Cross Mission in Seoul. And it is our great pleasure to host this webinar on IHL journals. And before we start, I would like to inform you that this webinar will be recorded and it will be made available to the public with some editing if needed. And today's webinar will be about introducing the two journals on IHL, Asia Pacific Journal of IHL, and the International Review of the Red Cross. And throughout this webinar, the experience in serving at the editorial board or the board of experts will be shared. And also it will provide the tips or recommendations for article submission. And without further ado, I would like to invite Ms. Kelly-Sienna Tin to the floor. Ms. Tin is the head of the legal department at the ICRC delegation in the Philippines, and she's serving as a board member of the Asia Pacific Journal of IHL. Ms. Tin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Junki, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. As you said, I am one of the board members of the Asia Pacific Journal of International Humanitarian Law, and I perform this duty really as under my role as head of the legal department for the International Committee of the Red Cross in Manila in the Philippines. And so therefore, I add to my tasks of classifying conflicts, providing advice on detention and conduct of hostilities, and engaging with the Philippines government on implementation of international humanitarian law. I add to this conducting the initial reviews of all of the articles which are proposed for the journal. And I'll come back to what does this mean in a moment. But just as background, the Asia Pacific Journal of International Humanitarian Law started in 2005 as the Asia Pacific Yearbook on IHL. So you might see the Asia Pacific Yearbook brown document on library bookshelves. But now after a short break, we decided to make it a peer-reviewed journal. And so now we've changed the color format and changed the name and the way that we do things. So the Asia Pacific Journal on International Humanitarian Law is now in its 4th year of publication, and it's a combined publication of the Institute of International Legal Studies at the University of the Philippines Law Center and the International Committee of the Red Cross. And the journal aims to produce peer-reviewed scholarly articles and book reviews, as well as commentary on significant developments in international humanitarian law and related fields. So it has a particular focus on conflict scenarios, weapons, new technologies of warfare, international criminal law, and international human rights law. But it might also focus on other topics relevant to international humanitarian law or conflict. It can also have a legal policy as well as a purely legal perspective. It has a special focus on the Asia Pacific region, and it is published on an annual basis. Our board members feature Professor Yu, who it's very wonderful to see, who will speak after me today, and expert academics from the Republic of Korea, Japan, China, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Thailand, the Philippines, Australia, and New Zealand. Just to give you a sense of how it works, when we receive a submission of an article, and indeed we ask for full articles generally rather than receiving abstracts of articles, when we receive a submission of an article, the managing editors, who are Professor Ramel Cassis from the University of the Philippines and my colleague, Regional Legal Advisor Saha Harun, and I review the articles to see if they are interesting, original, and generally correct in terms of international humanitarian law. We don't pretend to be experts on every single topic within international humanitarian law, so we do then pass the article to a board member to review. So the board member can provide comments and recommendations and will also recommend whether the article should go for peer review. At this point, I should note that if the article specifically references a particular context, such as Afghanistan or southern Thailand or the South China Sea, Then we will also send it to relevant International Committee of the Red Cross delegations just to see if it's too political to publish. We don't really want to be publishing articles that have one particular political viewpoint and which might cause sensitivity in our ongoing dialogue on relevant armed conflicts around the region or around the world. But just to note that, in fact, out of 20 articles, we've only rejected one article on the basis that it was too sensitive politically to publish. So generally, once that process is gone and once the board member has recommended peer review, then the peer review is conducted by two experts in the topic of the article. It is blind peer review, so the peer reviewers are unaware of the name and the affiliation of the author. The focus of the journal on the Asia-Pacific region means that we prefer to publish articles from people who are from the Asia-Pacific region or based in the Asia-Pacific region. We also prefer a focus on international humanitarian law, legal and policy issues that are relevant to the Asia-Pacific region. So, for example, we will accept an article about Ukraine and Russia if the author is based in the Asia Pacific or comes from the Asia Pacific, but also if the article references why that international armed conflict has an impact on the Asia Pacific region or what we can learn in this region from a conflict in another part of the world. We recently cross-published a blog from Lawfare, which was not by authors from the Asia Pacific region, but which was on cyber and digital security and conflict. And we felt that had particular resonance for this region. And so that's why we wanted to cross-post it to ensure that it had a broader readership on an issue that is particularly relevant to the region. Just to give you some idea as to the topics that we've had this year so far, we've had one article which is now ready for publication. The journal will be published in October, so we're still going through the peer review process for several other articles. But the topic that the article that has been approved for publication is on child soldiers. And particularly the challenge of Ongwen in the International Criminal Court, where he was a child soldier and he became a warlord. How do you balance the competing interests in terms of him being previously a child and therefore vulnerable, but then in fact committing war crimes? We have another article on children in armed conflict, which is under review at the moment, and this focuses more on the Philippines context. We also have two articles under review on religion and international humanitarian law, one on Islamic law and international humanitarian law, and one on Buddhism and international humanitarian law. We recently supported an event in South Asia with academics, which was a platform to discuss academic articles on the protection of the environment in armed conflict. There were some comparative reflections, such as third world criticism, some gender perspectives, practical perspectives, and religious perspectives, as well as a consideration of the impact of certain types of warfare, certain types of weapons, for example, or on the ongoing effect of explosive weapons at the end of a conflict on the environment. And we hope to have several articles coming out of that engagement. We also have a commentary on a regional event that we held last year on cyber warfare. As I said, this topic of cyber warfare and the digital environment is of great relevance to the Asia Pacific region. And so this is a commentary on some of the key topics that arose from a regional discussion on this topic. The 2022 edition included articles on maritime rescue services during naval warfare, obviously of great interest to this region, and also on the role of commissions of inquiry in strengthening criminal repression of violations of international law. The 2021 edition considered the use of lethal autonomous weapon systems from an international humanitarian law perspective. It considered humanitarian exemption clauses in the context of domestic counterterrorism measures. It provided a comparison between different types of international courts, so the International Court of Justice or the International Criminal Court in the context of international criminal law. And it looked at victim participation in war crimes prosecutions. I myself have published articles in the journal in the past before I was on the board on the universalization of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court and also on the need to protect medical ethics in times of armed conflict. So as you can see, it's a wide range of topics which we publish where while international humanitarian law is, of course, a discrete area of international law, within that framework, you can see that there are a wide range of topics that can actually be covered. And they don't necessarily all link directly to the Asia Pacific region, but they do have a particular relevance to the region and to questions which we're all thinking about as international humanitarian law practitioners, academics, or just people who have got interest in this topic. So I strongly encourage you to submit an article to the journal if you have a topic of international humanitarian law which you've been examining recently or thinking deeply about, and we look forward to reading them. Thanks very much for your attention, and I welcome any questions.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Dean, for the very informative presentation. Next, I would like to invite Professor Chung-gu Yu to the floor. Professor Yu is a professor at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy, and he's been serving at the Board of Experts for the Asia Pacific Journal of IHL since 2022. I now give the floor to Professor Yu.
Thank you, Jungi. I think let me begin by thanking the French mission of ICRC in this region, organizing this very meaningful event. And let me briefly introduce myself. My office is basically specialized in charge of emerging technology security area, and including the some international law and the international humanitarian law issue, and also the as a legal advisor in the first committee of the UN in the cyber and later autonomous weapon system, sometimes outer space issue. So I think I am relatively newcomer to the some Asia Pacific Journal in IHL issue. So I think previous speaker is tiny, very much well describe and then give basic information for the journal. So I think I better to introduce and then some promote understanding of IHL in Korea. And then today, I think relatively there are small participation from the Korean University and graduate student. I think small is beautiful. And then the person who joined this the Zoom meeting definitely very much interested in the IHL, and then also highly possible to submit the article to the journal, both of the journal in the ICRC International Review and then Asia Pacific Journal of IHL. So I'm gonna so explain the basic picture for the IHL in Korea, and then what are some emerging area for our the Korean interested in the field of policy, and then some practitioner in IHL issue, and then maybe I can add on some tip for the what is a better way to submit the article to the journal. Firstly, IHL in Korea, to be frank, in international law as a general, in general, it's very experts, and then the person who are interested in the major in the international law getting smaller. We have same situation, and even the Japan has the same situation due to the various reason. But the area for the field of international law, IHL, I think relatively has some is more promising because in the past in this region, the mainly basically focus on some economic development issue, but nowadays lots of some technology development. Also, there are some international disputes and international human rights and humanity issues very keen to our country. So I think recently, maybe my experiences and expert and practitioner getting more attention to the IHL in general. That's the basic picture for the Korea in today. And also the in this day, also lots of some ministry and then agency, particularly to study under the IHL issue, because the IHL is kinds of norms and standard what human being have to do to in the armed conflict situation. So I think that's not the we don't need to think about the regulation. We have to think about the what are the standards, norms, and then reflecting the global international value for human activity. That's like the basic approach for IHL. So in our government also, in that sense, to try to set up some guideline. It also, to be frank, in some of the maybe expert and practitioner, it's like kinds of some restriction for technology development of something. But I think in the other side of the coin shows that the IHL, and also maybe to abide by the IHL norms and principles is one of the key, the critical issue for Korea to maybe the tools for global standard on, and also in our some foreign policy, global pivotal states in general. So I think that's the another issue. Also, the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of some Justice also from this year try to any guideline for the protection of civilian and civilian objects. So argument and big plans, and also next year ROK will help the hold very big international conferences. We may call it the military use of AI technology. Also, the last year the conferences like cyber conferences they be held in the Hague, organized by the Korea and then Dutch, Netherlands. This year we will preside at the whole conferences. More than maybe 80 countries in the minister level will join and take part in the conferences. Definitely ICRC also, we will host the ICRC and then to discuss that issue. So I think that gonna be a momentum for Korea to maybe be interested in the IHL issue. That's the general and the background for the current situation of Korea, and also the this event. I think relatively the why these kinds of journal is important for the graduate and then sometimes undergraduate students. I think writing in English is can be the maybe can be the good very burden to the students, but I think it also can be some opportunity for students to write down the written English journal, and also we have a as Tiani mentioned that we have a good system to peer review system is can be the good maybe example and then opportunity and then model for young students to write down the English version of our article. So I personally strongly recommend to write down the English journal and as for the topic for the journal, I think there are various topics, and also you I think if I maybe recommend you may firstly to choose the topic first, and then you have to develop your controlling idea. So I think you can maybe they choose the some of the topics, so civilian protection and technology issue, and then do some issue, emerging issue in the IHL in general. And then you have to discuss the what's your some controlling idea for that to target for more specific topics. So I think you can maybe simply to see the title and then subject in the journal, and also you can maybe Google in the website in the just put the keywords of IHL, and then maybe you can ask some the GChatbot, maybe whatever the GChatbot the AI said, that I think that can be one of the topic for the journal. So I think that's the first step. You have to do that, and then secondly, I think maybe there are some of the students to study in the global study, international studies in your university, and then you have some mission, some mandate for the evaluation, to midterm, some papers, and then finally the final term paper or something. So I think I am also the inviting some professor in the one university in Korea. And then I think for my some the mandate to the students, I recommend some to write down some final term paper, developing your some presentation, and then maybe sorry, and then also the outline, and then discuss with the professor, and also in the class, and then we'll discuss the space manner and the topic in general with other participants and students. So I think you can maybe use those kinds of your some school and the university mission. So I think in my classes, for example, 25 of the foreign students, including Korean students, took my courses, and also, to be frank, in some IHL is some European students. They have some general background and knowledge for the IHL, and then also very much interested in the IHL issue. Relatively in the Asian Pacific, relatively it's not much some knowledge, and then there's maybe attention something. But I think, as I mentioned before, it's getting better. And then in Korea also, lots of ISL issues ongoing, and the ongoing issue for the policymaker something. So I think to use your existing platform, I mean, then not to maybe create a new opportunity in the platform, the time to write down the article. I think it's going to be a burden to you. So try to use your existing work and efforts and platform in your school or in your workplaces, and then develop and then consult with other some experts and the person. I think so. As a student, you can maybe use the contact with the branch of Korea ICRC mission. Definitely the Jungi or other staff, and maybe definitely fully support your maybe enthusiasm and then your plan and intention. So I think that's going to be another approach to write down the English article in this journal. So I think in general, I think I strongly recommend the even is very not easy situation in this day, but I think recommend and strongly suggest to be more focused on the IHL issue, and also to try to keep in touch, and then include me and then Jungi. I think that's gonna be a first step to using your some the class and then your workplaces in university. And that's all for today's discussion. The presentation for today's event. Thank you very much.
Well, Thank you very much, Professor Yu, for sharing your insight. And I'm sure that through the two presentations given by Ms. Thin and Professor Yu, we could learn about how to make a submission to the Asia Pacific Journal of IHL and what can be interesting IHL topics for submission from the Korean academics. And next, I would like to invite Ms. Gillian Lafferty, the managing editor of the International Review of the Red Cross. Ms. Lafferty, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's great to be part of this event. Thanks once again, as the other speakers have said, to the organizers for putting it together. So the International Review of the Red Cross is the International Committees of the Red Cross. Red Cross's global flagship publication, academic publication, with a very broad editorial line that sort of covers everything the ICRC does or is involved in, to put it as generally as possible. Which is to say, our editorial line includes anything related to international humanitarian law, but also humanitarian policy and humanitarian action. What that ends up meaning in practice is that almost everything we publish has a nexus to war, to armed conflict in some way, but it doesn't technically have to, because humanitarian policy, humanitarian action can take place outside of the confines of armed conflict, whether that's because you're in a sort of other situations of violence context or simple humanitarian crisis. But anyway, I'll get back to that. So the International Review of the Red Cross was founded in 1869. So it's been continuously published for 154 years. It is an academic, double-blind, peer-reviewed journal that, like I said, publishes within that editorial line of IHL, humanitarian policy, and humanitarian action. We publish 3 times a year on a very regular schedule. I'm going to say that with a sort of slight bit of wryness, because historically the review has been relatively behind schedule and a bit less regular, but we are on schedule and regularly publishing at this point. I'm also acknowledging that because if you looked at last year, you'll see we published quite a lot more than 3 times, but that was to make up for our long publication delay. So now we're on schedule for 3 times a year. The review used to operate primarily by soliciting submissions. Once each edition of the review has a theme, and the editors would work with the editorial board to say who are the right experts to invite to discuss this particular thematic issue. But under the current editorial team and editorial board, we've sort of shifted the model because we think that's not an especially democratized process, that instead only favors very established, recognized voices, and those aren't always the people with the most and most interesting things to say about particular topics. So now we operate almost exclusively on a call for papers model. What I mean by that is for every single edition, like I said, we choose a particular theme. So for example, in December of last year, we published a theme on persons with disabilities in the context of armed conflict. And about 12 to 15 months before we plan to publish that actual edition, we release a call for papers on our website, and then we publicly promote it on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and through many, many, many mailing lists around the world. That says, here's the topic of this upcoming edition. Here's the broad contours of what's relevant about that topic to IHL, humanitarian policy, humanitarian action. We're inviting you to propose articles to us. And we give deadlines for when those proposals have to be in and when you can expect to deliver a paper if you're invited to. In contrast to what Kelly was saying about the Asia Pacific Journal, we don't expect full papers at the beginning, at the first stage. And part of it's because we use this call for papers model. And we think because it's so broad, that's unfair to people to ask you to write a whole paper. Because it's so broad and we're doing these giant editions, and we get quite a lot of, and it's a broader editorial line, we're going to end up with more submissions. And that's a lot of work for someone to do. If we aren't sure, we're decently sure anyway, we're going to move forward. So we invite proposals, by which I mean we invite people to write the abstract of the article they plan to write. What it will basically laying out the topic and what they plan to argue, and it's and how it contributes to the existing literature on that topic. And I think it's worked well for us simply because we get so many submissions. So for example, we have an edition coming up soon on the protection of the environment in war. And from our call for papers, and we're going to publish probably 20 papers, we got 150 proposals. So that wouldn't have felt fair to ask people to write 150 papers if we weren't going to accept anywhere close, but that's different if the volume is different when it's a more specific topic to begin with. So that's what's worked well for us. So once we have those proposals for each edition, we form a jury. So it's again just another way our model is a little bit different from the Asia Pacific Journal, because our whole mandate is so very broad. Then we make a small jury of 3 to 5 experts that are super experienced on the theme of the edition itself. And so again, for that edition, for the environment edition, our jury is made up of Maria Leto, who was the ILC Special Rapporteur on the environment and war. We have Karen Hume, who is an expert in international environmental law, and we have 2 ICRC experts who are super specialized on the environment and IHL. And so with those experts, the editorial team, so myself and the editor-in-chief, Bruno de Meyer, and our associate, we work with that jury to review every abstract. And then once we invite papers, to review every paper that's submitted. And then once we've assessed the basic quality of those papers, we then send some to peer review. Some we have to turn away and reject, and others we send back to the authors with initial comments before if we think they're not quite ready for peer review yet. As I mentioned, our peer review process is also a double-blind process, so the peer reviewer doesn't know who the author of the paper is, and likewise, we don't disclose the identity of the peer reviewer to the author, so neither knows the identity of the other. And we ask them to make comments and make a recommendation about how to proceed with the paper and transmit those comments to the author. Even if we're not accepting the paper, we still think the authors should get to understand why and what other experts thought about their work and how to improve it in case they want to try to revise it later or submit it somewhere else or continue work on that topic. So that's sort of how our process works. And then eventually we have our 20 or so articles per edition that we actually publish, and it's bound in paper as well, but we publish it in free and open access on the reviews website. And our publisher is Cambridge University Press, so it's under sort of a big academic international press as well, which also really helps to get the articles publicized and cited, which helps authors who are trying to get their work promoted have it promoted really well. So that's sort of how our model works. In addition to these thematic editions, in every single thematic edition, we also publish a few papers that are not on topic. And that's because, and you'll see this on our website, if you check it out, we have what we call a sort of standing call for papers, an open submission. If you write any article within our editorial line, you can always submit it to us and we will consider it. The odds are a little bit different, right? So if you submit a paper and there's only maybe 3 or 4 spots in each edition for an off-theme article, that's probably not the best odds, but we publish some of our most interesting papers as those selected articles. We end up with really cool creative ideas, which is just to say that if you would like to be published with us and you see that our current calls for papers or upcoming calls for papers are not on themes that are maybe closely related to your own work, that doesn't mean it's hopeless. You can reach out to us via our institutional email account anytime, and we will consider those papers just as thoroughly as we consider thematic papers. We don't treat them any differently. And we try to get back to people as quickly as possible. So we know if it's not on a set schedule, it's a little bit harder. So that's sort of our model for how we solicit papers and how we build editions and what we publish. On the review side, we've had a huge priority these last few years in trying to diversify our authorship, and that's part of why we moved to the call for papers model. A lot of IHL publishing has historically looked awfully older and white and male and European, and that's awfully boring, but it's also a problem. It's not just boring. It's cheeky to say it's only boring. It's really a problem. There's much more to say than that small demographic of people with very similar perspectives have to contribute to this conversation. So that's why we moved to this call for paper model, to not only look for the established voices who all look awfully similar, but it comes from a genuine commitment to that project. And so we are thrilled to be part of this event and to be encouraging publication of IHL scholarship from Korea. And we'd be very happy to hear from folks about project ideas, paper ideas you have, or submissions to our upcoming calls for papers. I don't want to take up too much time, so I'll say 2 more things before I finish. One, just to give you guys a sense of what our upcoming editions are, including ones we haven't released the calls for papers yet or will very, very soon. So currently we're in the middle of producing an edition, as I mentioned, on the environment. Our next edition after that will be on the fundamental principles of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. That call for papers has officially closed, although if you reached out to us really fast and thought you had a great idea, we would be happy to hear from you still. After that, so this month and next month, we're publishing 2 calls for papers for editions that will be published next year. One is on IHL and peace. And so that call for paper should come out next week. And that encompasses many things. I won't go into too much detail because the call for papers will be published next week. But if that's a topic that interests you, we would love to hear from you. we don't just, I mean, there's many, like I said, that covers many things. If IHL helps keep the peace, if it helps build the peace, questions around accountability and forgiveness and things like that, and how IHL encourages any of those things or doesn't. There's many parts of this. IHL obligations that extend into peacetime. Anyway, it's all on the papers. The next one after that is on military perspectives on IHL. That is sort of a set of voices we also historically haven't heard that much from as the review and published that much of. But obviously military perspectives on the realities of IHL's application in war are so important to any meaningful conversation on what IHL is and how we think about it and its effectiveness. So that's the edition afterward, after IHL and Peace. And that call for papers will be coming out either end of this month or early next month. The last thing I'll just say is just to give you a sense maybe of one of our recent editions. They're all on our website, of course, but just to give you a bit of a sense. So like I said, if you look at our recent editions, you'll see that there's quite a lot of them because we were catching up. But our most recent edition was the one I mentioned on persons with disabilities. The one before that was on how IHL developed, and that was actually a double edition. So it's 2 editions rolled into one super thick book of articles. And it was a great edition. We had a huge array of perspectives on many topics. That edition we broke up essentially into 3 sections: the past, the present, and the future of how IHL developed. So in the section on the past, we had some fascinating historical articles on historical legal articles on the sort of tracing the threads of where modern IHL originated and came from. For example, one of the articles in that edition that got the most sort of excitement in academia was this article by this wonderful scholar, Tanya Tilano, about this provision of the Mexican criminal code in the 1800s that actually predates the Lieber Code in the US. And the Lieber Code is in so many ways seen as this like origin point for some pieces of modern IHL. But if you look at the Mexican criminal code from a few years before, those concepts were already there. And that was such a fun article to work on and to publish. We have these articles on the future and interviews on the future. For example, one on the explosive weapons political declaration and how, because it was just coming out at the time this edition, it was just finalized when the edition was published. So we have an article on that and on how that sort of process developed and what that means for the current development of IHL and how that's looking. And we had some really interesting articles in that future section, sort of taking like what's next approach, looking at where IHL's been and where it is, and then saying, okay, like, so what does the future development of the law look like? Like we had a very interesting one on informal lawmaking and that sort of traced the increasing move toward informal lawmaking in IHL, and then looking forward saying, okay, like if that's the trend, what do we do with it? Or if we don't want it to be the trend, can we change it? Anyway, it's like just a small overview of a recent edition. I'll stop there. I don't want to take up all of the time, but I will just end by saying we are always happy to hear from authors, truly, whether you already are sure you have a paper written or in mind, or if you want a little bit of advice. And our international review email address is on our website. It's just review@icrc.org, and we are always happy to hear from folks. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you, Ms. Lafferty, for the very comprehensive introduction of the International Review of the Red Cross. And next, I invite Professor Ji-Hyun Park to the floor. Professor Park is a professor at Yongsan University, and she's been serving at the editorial board of the International Review since 2021. Professor Park, you have the floor. Professor Park, your mic is muted.
I'm trying to share the documents that I have, and now it's working. Yeah, it's let's see. Okay. Do you see the screen I'm sharing with you?
Yes.
Is it the PPT? Okay. So here, just in case the audiences are interested in knowing specific details of the information here. I like to give them more clear view of the ICRC International Review. Okay, all nice to meet you all. And I'd like to give you the brief insight of ICRC International Review. Although Jillian, she's very bright editorial manager. She handles most of the more than 150 articles per issue, I think. But again, from my view, from the perspective of a writer, I think these informations may be interested in for the writer perspective. So here is the ICRC. As you can see, ICRC provides all the supports for the needed. And here, how does the ICRC relate to the IRRC? Sorry, that it's an abbreviation. So ICRC is the impartial, neutral, independent organization, as we all know. The mission of the ICRC is protecting the lives and dignity of the victims of war and other situations of violence. So it covers international conflict as well as the non-international conflict. So in the world, everyone in the world are related to the ICRC because we can be related to the international armed conflict or non-international armed conflict. Korea especially relate to the non-international armed conflict currently, and we have issue of separate family, also the prison of war issue in the North Korea. So those are the issues that Koreans are interested, but still the issues are very limited in terms of war issues handled in policy and law matters in South Korea. But IRRC, established in 1869, now heading to the 154 years old journal, specialized in humanitarian law in general. So by the writers and readers who might be interested in more expanded scope of IHL, if you are reading regular basis this international review, your knowledge on the IHL will grow very, very dramatically. My first time reading this review journal was really the eye-opening for my experience, because details of the analysis given by this review was superb. So the knowledge received from this review was astonishing for me to have it. So I like you also to have this experience by just reading the journals and review of the article. Okay, so going to the editorial board, experiencing here, you see also the Zillion. We had a meeting at the Switzerland. It was a very excellent and nice experience meeting all of them, and including Bruno. Everyone was such an eager mode to discuss everything about how we are going to access to more readers, how to invite more writers, excellent articles, and there were no resting. So everybody was so eager to provide all the information they have. Even though they had a jet lag, they're eager to talk about everything they know. So it was a really good opportunity and a chance to meet all of them, and a really privileged to work as a board member. So how the review process comes to me is that the email message of the Bruno or the Jillian comes to me through the email and say, please see through the following links, and English, Arabic, Chinese, French, Russian, Spanish are the languages basically they will receive. So just have in mind, English may be the proper language for the Koreans, but you have a ChatGPT working on the Korean, the language also. DeepL, the founder of DeepL, said they're working on the Korean language as the 5th largest market in the world. So maybe as a Korean writers, you may translate into English or Arabic, Chinese, French, Russian, Spanish using the DeepL too. So more chances coming, even though you are not familiar writing in English, no problem. DeepL will handle it, and Google Translator will handle it, and ChatGPT will handle all of the problems with the language block. So don't worry, and you have a more opportunity sharing your ideas. Okay, so these are the language things that you might have in mind. And now, although Zillian shared how the core on papers are given to the viewers, here are the messages I got. Bruno will say, revisiting the fundamental principles of Red Cross and Red Crescent movement will be the next issue. So if you know someone, and just distribute all the links that they can submit their articles. As Jillian said, it is very nice that only abstract is needed for the writers. You don't have to write the full script and submit it at once. So if you can write a very interesting abstract, that will give you the chance to submit to the full article to the international review. As we already discussed, international review is 154 years old article journal. So you might have a big access to the more opportunity having prize and or. The benefit, here I say, the benefit of having you published in an international review is that recently the message coming from the Bruno also shared the prize won by the American Society of International Law. Says there are 2 articles received a very big prize of it. So it was very good news for us. At the same time, if you publish it in an international review, you might also have a chance to have another prize by writing 1 article. You can have 2 prizes, one by publishing it, another one by getting access to the prize by another association. Okay, so this is a benefit. And I should also introduce you emerging voices, and you can also see the video clips that Bruno and other editorial member had participated introducing emerging voices. This particular issue is for the young generation, might be interested in IHL, basically selecting 30 articles out of 150 articles submitted. So how hard that is, Jillian have been doing it, but this issue is definitely a cue point for the young generation interested in IHL. So this is really something that you might want to know, how the international review is putting their effort to diversifying and also giving more chance to all the people around the world. Okay, so that's the point that you might be interested in, how you can contribute to the review, right? So one is open calls for the papers, as Jillian already talked about it. And this issue, this is a open discussion that you can submit your articles, abstract through this part. And there is a standing call, the one same. So you can find the issues that you might be interested in, you submit your article, and they're reviewing, they will contact you. And second one is past calls for papers. You might want to tag what has been the issues that the published, and they might have received 100 articles out of, and then they will publish less than 30 articles, right? So you can check whether the articles published has how this article has been published the quality of reference, quality of content. Basically, the contents are really interesting to see. Every articles are super intelligent, analyzed. So you will have a really have a good time reading all the articles. But you can also see what kind of article has been chosen by the reviewers. Okay, and there is also guideline for authors. You can take a look at the guidelines. How you can submit that one. Okay, and if I have more time, I like to cover the 5 things. They basically these informations are given on the internet, but still I like to point out topics and titles. These questions you might have to ask before submitting it, and the contents. These are guidelines for you to think about before you write whole chapter of the content. Okay, and structure and arguments are also important for you to consider for your article to be chosen, right? So does author formulate a clear thesis, question, problem at the beginning of the article, and how is it developed in there? From the beginning and ending, the story has to be very logical and has to have the same context linked to it, right? And language and style, this I think ChatGPT can handle that, but does the introduction engage you? So you have to like it item, and also the title has to catch your eyes and catch your thinking, right? So language of article be written clear, grammar correct, the sentence clear, easy to read, what can be improved. Those are questions that you might have to consider before submitting it. So according to the guideline, these 5 options are given to the viewers. So I recommend as it is, and second is minor revision, third one is a major revision, 4 is a resubmission, 5th one unfortunate rejection to it. But you might want to have another chance having submitting to another journal. So don't worry, your opinions are always valuable. Things are just that there are so many competition, high competition, so many articles who want to be published in this international review. Articles can be circulated anytime. You have chance to be published. One article is published in the international review, you might be invited to another article journals a lot. That's my guess, and that was a fun thing you can expect. And the last one I want to talk about is diversity in inclusion. Actually, the international review is putting their effort into. So topics they cover, types of publications are various. Not only articles, book review, editorials, interviews are published in the international review. And the total authors are from academic institution, not only academic institution, research institution, government institution, court, independent researchers, international organizations, military, NGO, movement, private sectors are all invited to the article writing. So it is not limited to these authors. Whatever the position you have, your ideas are valuable, then reviewers are welcoming your ideas. And gender so far has about 50%, 55%, 45% variation to the female, male, but the genders are going to equal, and they're paying attention to these diversity and inclusion. That's very lucky that we have living in this generation. And field of profession of authors are various. So same as total authors, the various field of authors are trying to give their view and perspective and sharing all over the world. International reviews are given to the all public officers, and they have access to the point that they can read this insightful articles, so they can put into their policy. So policymakers are all interested in reading these articles too. Okay, and the country of author's origins are also analyzed by the review. According to the analysis, more than 90 countries are contributing their views to the international review. And there was also the Korean author participating in submitting the articles. I hope you watching this video submit the article to the international review. And here is the website you can submit, and I hope you are committing and heading to the action for submitting your valuable articles. And when you are not interested in, or you are afraid of submitting to the big journals like International Review, here is the part that you can get the information of the policy newspapers. Here is a site you can get the newspaper. And starting point is reading the article slowly, and you will have more information on IHL. You'll be comfortable giving more of your views to the world. And 5 is the 5 continental that we are living in. 5 can do more, and our all diversity can contribute more to the world. So I really appreciate and submitting and interesting IHL. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Park, for your presentation. Now I open the floor for questions, and I will start with one. I actually have a question for both the Asia Pacific Journal of IHL and the International Review. For example, if I write an article and I heavily cite to the sources written in Korean or in foreign languages, how would that be considered by the editorial board? I mean, this time we are lucky that we have Professor Park and Professor Yu at the boards, but in general, for the sources written in foreign languages, how would they be reviewed or considered?
Thank you, Junki. Should I start with the Asia Pacific Journal of IHL? It's a really good question. And so, I mean, just to answer your question specifically, I would say that we are very fortunate to have Professor Yu, so we would rely on him to at least look at the footnotes that have been cited to make sure that they are actually genuine articles. I would also echo what Professor Parker said, that DeepL is a very useful way of checking translations. So we would run it through a search engine like that, a translation engine, to review to see, does this actually make sense? But yes, first of all, we would rely on the expert, and then secondly, we would rely on the artificial intelligence. But I think also your question is a valid one, going even further in that within the board of the Asia Pacific Journal, we have been wondering whether, in fact, we should accept submissions in languages other than. It does make it very difficult for us in terms of editing and in terms of peer review, but it would actually make our journals more accessible and more diverse. So it is something that we have been considering. And in fact, I think going forward, then probably we haven't come to a final agreement, but I think in fact the policy might be that we do indeed accept submissions in other languages, so in Korean, for example. And what we would do then is ask the author to provide a summary in English, and that they could do very easily through using a translation service. But we would then also rely on experts who speak the language to review the article. But as I said, that's not set in stone yet. But there's something that we're definitely thinking about, just to broaden the readership and the authorship.
And Jillian, would that be the same for the international review?
Could you just repeat the question? My Wi-Fi had briefly cut out, so I missed the question.
No problem. For example, if I write an article and I heavily cite sources written in Korean, how would that be reviewed or considered by the editorial board?
Sure. So I came in the middle of Kelly's answer, so I'm not sure what the Asia Pacific Journal answer was, but for the review, we're fine with that as long as you can translate the names of the sources into English. It is, of course, easier for us if the sources are in fact in English, since no one on our team speaks Korean. So if that's the case, probably your article will take longer for us to process. We're going to have to find somebody who speaks Korean and can check those sources and substantiate them. So that will take longer and may prolong the process a bit, but we're not at all averse to that because, of course, we understand that, you know, some of the best sources are in a particular language. But sort of on the subject of how to use translation services well in publishing with us, like, yes, of course, Jihyun is right. You can use online translation services to help you translate. But you do also have to remember that there's going to be an editorial process in which you're working with us as editors. And unfortunately, we aren't able to conduct that process, not, you know, in Korean. We can conduct it in any of the 6 languages we accept submissions in, but unfortunately can't directly process that in Korean. So that's a bit of a challenge, which is unfortunate. I mean, I wish we could do that more easily, but there's no objection to the sourcing being in another language as long as it is genuinely the best source. There's not a good alternative, and understanding it would take us a little bit longer. The only thing I wanted to add actually before, but again, I apologize that my Wi-Fi briefly cut out, on the sort of ChatGPT side of things, it is an excellent tool for helping refine things, especially translation, but I would just make sure you guys know to really operate with caution anywhere near citations with ChatGPT. It makes up sources that sound like good sources because it's estimating based on other information. It's not actually giving you always complete information. So I would be very careful. I do not recommend it as a tool to actually help you write or research, but it can be a tool to help you refine your language or translation, and that's an important difference. So I would just put that out there. But I apologize if that was covered when I wasn't on the call briefly.
Since we're learning late, I guess we can take one more question from the participants. Yes, Mawar, please.
Thank you, and thanks to all the presenters. Because I'm only given one question, so I'm going to squeeze 2 questions into one, if that's okay. Perhaps it would be interesting for the viewers to understand what the timeframes normally are from the moment of the close of submissions until the confirmation whether their abstract will be chosen or whether they can submit it, and the final product. That would be question 1. And I know that we haven't touched on the whether the review or the AP journal are indexed, and I'm sure that the listeners are also very much interested to understand if these are indexed journals and whether their contribution can count towards their academic promotions and so on and so forth. So if you don't mind touching on those, I would leave it to the floor to decide who's best to answer this. But yeah, thank you.
I'm happy to jump in from the review side. So for indexing first, so we are ranked in the impact factor. Historically, we remain ranked even when behind schedule, which I humbly say was not a small achievement because your impact factor gets massively tanked by being behind schedule because it goes down hugely, but we still remain ranked. And that's because it's your first year or 2 after the expected publication date, how much you get cited, that determines your impact factor. And we were behind schedule, so often for a year there'd be no citations. But now that we're on schedule, our publisher has made very clear they expect them to also increased quite a lot, given that we were remaining okay in that front, even when we were behind schedule. As far as timeline goes, it varies a little bit edition to edition, but not by a lot. Our timeline basically works like this. We publish a call for papers. At the point of that call for papers, there are 6 or 8 weeks, depending on the call. That's where it varies, from when we publish the call to when we close sort of our inbox for new submissions in line with that call for papers. Once we have all of those submissions, after that 6 or 8 weeks, we take about 4 weeks to process those submissions, all of the abstracts we receive. And by the end of that 4 weeks, we will let you know if you're being invited to submit a full paper or not. At that point, so at the end of that 4 weeks, there's usually about 2.5 or 3 months between then and when we expect you to deliver a full paper. So at that point, we're what? Let's say it's 3 months. So then by then we're about 5 months from the actual call for papers. There's a 6 weeks and another 4 weeks and another 3 months. Then as the papers come in, and you can always submit them early, we will only like you better if you're ahead of schedule. But we'll be very happy if you're on time. At that point, there's then a few month-long process of reviewing the articles, depending on when they come in. If we get a flood at once, it can be a little slower. If they're trickling in over time, it's a little faster, where we review them with our jury and then send them to peer review or not. Usually upon receipt, it takes about, depending on the article, 2 to 4 weeks to decide if it's going to peer review or not. Then peer review, depending on peer reviewer schedules, takes like another month to get comments. So it's 2 months from when your article comes in to hopefully, if it's going to be peer reviewed, when we have comments back. But again, once we review it with our jury, we could send it back to you and say, here's some comments before we're willing to go to peer review, or we could have to tell you that it won't move forward. Once we get peer review comments back, we'll send it back to you. We typically give authors 3 weeks to work on peer review comments, unless they're extremely extensive, and then maybe we'll give 4. We typically give 3 to 4 weeks, depending on the article, to incorporate peer review comments and send back to us. We will then process the article, and if we think it's ready for publication, we send it to our publisher. That's all to say that from call for papers to the actual, and then there's like a month or 6 weeks at the end where it's not in our control, where our publisher is doing their magic to make it look pretty and be ready for the internet and printing. Which is to say, from call for papers to publication, depending on the edition, it's 12 to 15 months. And we set out all those deadlines in the initial call for paper, so there's no surprises. That's how we work.
And just on the Asia Pacific Journal, we generally publish in October every year. That is when the online version comes out, and then the hard copy version generally comes out around about April the following year. But once the edition has been published online in October, and once again, I'm not sure that I don't think that I mentioned that all of the articles are open access online. Once that is out in October, then we issue the call for papers for the next journal, and that generally gives us between say November to March. Generally, the call for papers ends at the beginning of March the following year. We have been known to extend it. So this year we have actually extended it until the end of May. So in fact, we've just closed the call for papers. And at that point, then we go through in fact, we do it on a rolling basis. When we get an article, then we will submit it to review by a board member and then to blind peer review. And generally that'll take so maybe we'll give our board members about 2 weeks to a month to review it, and then we'll give the peer reviewers a month to review it and provide comments. And then, as Gillian said, then it takes obviously some time for the author to go through some of those comments, but we will provide a deadline as well for them to get it back to us. We really hope with all of the formatting and so on and the editing process to get the articles sort of through peer review and back to us by the end of August, really. And so we really hope within a year's time to get papers through and to be able to be published in October every year. In terms of indexing, the Asia Pacific Journal of IHL is not currently indexed, but we are going through a process of getting accreditation by Scopus, which is a well-renowned indexing database, and that process is currently underway. So we do hope to get indexing because yes, indeed, it helps with citations and with publication and obviously career progression for academics.
If there's no additional question, I would like to close the session by thanking you all for joining the webinar today and introducing and sharing your insight about making submission to the 2 IHL journals. And I wish you all a wonderful evening. Thank you very much.